Welcome to the 11th Annual ANAPRI Stakeholders Conference, brought to you live from the land of Teranga, Dakar, Senegal, with the theme "From Policy to Practice, Strengthening Local Institutions for Sustainable Food Systems Transformation in Africa." This conference is hosted by Isabel in Dakar, Senegal, and sponsored by key partners including the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, through the Feed and Future Innovation Lab for Food Security Policy, Research, Capacity and Influence, PRCI. And the Comprehensive Africa Climate Change Initiative Project, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation through the International Fertilizer Development Center, the Michigan State University, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the Center for Coordination of Agricultural Research and Development for Southern Africa, ISDA, Green Revolution in Africa, AGA, the African Union Commission, and all the ANAPRI centers. And now, today's program.
Advancing Africa's agriculture through policy research and influence.
Distinguished guests, speakers, and stakeholders, bonjour, good morning, salam alaikum. My name is Saran Kabawage, and I will take you through all 3 days of this 11th annual ANAPRI Stakeholder Conference. Thank you for your presence this morning. I'd like to just point out that the official opening is no longer at 2, but at 4 p.m. So that we made that small change, but doesn't figure on the programs you have. Je suis ravie de vous accueillir à la 11e conférence annuelle des parties prenantes d'ANAPRI, ici à Dakar. It is my great honor to welcome you to the 11th annual ANAPRI Stakeholders Conference here in Dakar. This year, we gather under the theme, From Policy to Practice, Strengthening Local Institutions for Sustainable Food Systems in Africa. Food Systems Transformation in Africa. Ce thème reflète l'importance d'adopter des solutions locales et adaptées pour garantir la sécurité alimentaire et la résilience des systèmes agricoles en Afrique. As the renowned Kenyan scholar Ali Mazrui once said, Africa consumes what it does not produce and produce what it does not consume. This insight applies not only to goods and services, but also to knowledge and research. Too often, actions for development in Africa are shaped by external narrative with minimal input from local research. The result? Solutions that fail to address the continent's realities sustainably. Yet, Africa is rich in intellectual brilliance and innovative potential. Investing in research and building institutional capacity is not just a necessity, it is imperative. Through African minds, African science, African knowledge, we can build a more reliant Africa, a more resilient Africa. I encourage you all to approach these 3 days with curiosity, collaboration, and commitment to actionable outcomes. Together, we can build a stronger, more self-reliant Africa. Now, let us begin. I invite our moderator for this first session, Dr. Zenam Penda from SUA, to guide us through the first session's objectives and outcomes. Please join me in welcoming her.
No, it's fine. Thanks. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. As she said, my name is Zenam Penda from Sokoine University of Agriculture in Tanzania. I'm also a member of ANAPRI. Sokoine is the member of ANAPRI. So this morning, I should say welcome. Welcome to this 11th ANAPRI annual conference. We normally use this conference to reflect on what is happening in the continent. We reflect on what is happening in terms of the policies, reflect on what is happening Oh, thank you. So we use this opportunity to do some reflection of what is happening in our countries, in the continent, in terms of the policies that has evolved, in terms of the implementation of what is happening, and as ANAPRI of what we have been contributing over the years. So it's a very important time for us and for everyone in this room. So this session today, one of the elements is to reflect on what it has been happening. And as you can agree, all of you can agree with me that in Africa, so far, is the only country, I can say, is the only region in the world that still depends on international organizations for designing and implementation of policies for agricultural development. So we are still depending on international organization. So much of these organizations, they've got knowledge, they've got skills. Yeah, they're very far in terms of the skills in designing and developing policies. But when you look at the policies that are developed, they are sometimes missing to deliver what is expected. And it's only because they are missing on what is on the ground. And that's where ANAPRI plays the role. So ANAPRI members are on the ground, they are always in what is happening, so it's easy to connect. And there have been some efforts going on in the world trying to build capacities of
ANAPRI, advancing Africa's agriculture through policy research and influence.
They're taken by international organizations. Yeah, so there's that,
ANAPRI,
but there's still some
advancing Africa's agriculture through policy research and influence.
The effort has been to build the capacity, to make sure that the capacities are retained in the region for the benefit of the region. And then we also see some international organizations, trying to support the effort. So we have some regional or some international organizations which are emphasizing on what we call the local-led development, to make sure that we have these people on the ground, they're leading this program of designing and implementing the programs for agriculture. And over the past decade, we've seen the CGAR organizations, international universities, which are funded by global donors, sought to strengthen the capacity of African agricultural policy research institutions. So these are efforts which are well appreciated, and the ANAPRI have received that support. But we really need to know what is the impact of this support. Do we see some changes? Do we see some benefit? So here it came PRCI. They did a survey, tried to look on that effect so that we can learn from there, see what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and how to move forward. So in this session, we'll try to listen to some of these findings from the research done by PRCI, looking at the challenges and gaps. But we also need to do a reflection from the development partners, from the donors who have been working with ANAPRI, just to see this issue of institutional capacity and localization. How far has it gone? What needs to be done? We will also get a reflection from the centers themselves, because they've been involved. How is this capacity building have enhanced them, and what are the gaps? Yeah? But we will also need to hear from you as members or as participants on this conference to get your views. Yeah, so that is what we're expecting from this session. So saying that, I would like to invite the first person who is going to give us an opening remark, yeah, just to tell us what they've been doing as PRCI, and just to set the floor. So I'd like to invite Professor David Shile. David Shile is the professor. I should not get it wrong, just a moment.
Michigan State
Yes.
University.
Professor Shile is from International Development in the Development of Food, Agriculture, and Resource Economics at Michigan State University. He's also the co-director of the Department of Food Security Group, and he's a member of the core technical team of MSU, or Michigan State University, Global Center for Food System Innovation. So he's very knowledgeable of ANAPRI. So welcome, Prof.
Welcome, Professor Dave. Everyone that needs interpreting, we have the earphones here in the back, so that if you want to listen to the sessions in French or English, you can get one.
And do we have a clicker for the presentation?
One second. Chris may enlighten us.
You do have a clicker? Okay. Great. Yeah, that'll make it easier. Okay, well, I may have to ask you all to advance because it's not advancing. Okay, so I'm very happy to be here this morning. Really pleased to be able to, let's go back to the first slide. Really pleased to be able to talk about this topic, which has become kind of central to what we try to do, right? Really pleased that ANAPRI chose to have this topic, lead off this session. So let me get into it. Let's advance 2 slides, please. Okay, so back a slide, please. Okay, so PRCI. I just wanted to give a few remarks about what PRCI does. I'm not going to give you all of the details, right? I'm going to give you the very brief overview, and then I'm going to talk about what I've been thinking about localization for the past 6 years and what I think it implies. What it implies for organizations like MSU, what it implies for organizations like USAID, what it implies for ANAPRI and ANAPRI centers, and so forth. Okay, so PRCI is about assisting our partners to build their own sustainable institutional capacity to do food security policy research with impact, okay? That's a carefully worded statement. So let's advance 1 slide. It's about our partners building their own capacity, all right? Not our vision of what capacity they need. Next slide. It's about building sustainable institutional capacity, which of course includes individual capacity, of course, but it always in an institutional context. Next slide. And it's about building capacity to do research with impact, all right? That's as much as I'm going to say about pre-RCI per se. Let's go to the next slide. I will say that we have, next slide please. We have a footprint across Africa and Asia. Next slide, we're in 13 countries of Africa. And we then, of course, also work with ANAPRI, which has 16 members across a number of countries. And then in Asia, we work with 12 centers across 10 countries. So we've been able to kind of pursue this vision of helping our partners build their own sustainable institutional capacity to do policy research that matters, that actually has some impact on the ground. Next slide, please. Okay, so turning to the issue of localization and sustainable policy and programmatic change. Next slide. So one foundational observation I think underpins all of this, and this is that humans learn by making mistakes, right? And then having at the same time the confidence and the humility to learn from those mistakes. It's the only way that human beings learn, right? We've got to make mistakes, then we've got to be confident enough and humble enough to look at our mistakes and learn from them. And what goes for people goes for organizations, okay? And I would say at all levels, global level, national level, all the way down to local level. I just came from Ghana, where we had a great meeting at district level, municipal level, in the district of Keta on Kassi. Really wonderful meeting, and they are thinking their way through and taking charge of their own development. And ISER in Ghana is kind of helping them do that. I know all the other centers in PRCI are doing similar things. So I think that this basic observation has profound organizational and operational implications. Next slide. So I have the one foundational observation and then two operational takeaways, which I'll then walk through. For the first is that sustained and effective policy and programmatic change, for improved food security requires deep localization. I'll talk about what I mean by that. And this deep localization requires behavioral change on both sides of the development continuum. Okay, next slide. So, about sustainable change. Next slide, please. All right. So, we all know what showpieces are. Africa is full of showpieces. They might be showpiece legislation, showpiece organizations, showpiece policies and programs, and so forth, okay? So these are policies and programs, organizations that check all the boxes for best practices, and for that very reason, in my view, they fail. They don't get implemented, okay? Africa doesn't need more showpieces. So what it needs are policies and programs that are actually put into action, okay, meaning they can be effectively implemented with the organizational capacity that exists in Africa, okay? They can appropriately evolve over time. That means stakeholders being involved in dialoguing and so forth, and being able to evolve the approach as conditions and understandings and power dynamics change. Nothing stays the same in this world. It's always changing. We have to adapt, okay? And they need to be informed by strong local empirical evidence, okay? Next slide. What I didn't say is that they need to be driven by empirical evidence. And some of my fellow analysts may wonder what I'm saying here, but I think it's true that slavish attention to evidence and best practice to the exclusion of the local realities, the political and social realities, the power dynamics, and so forth, what does it do? It generates showpieces that technical analysts might be really happy with, but that don't get implemented. Okay, next slide. Okay, so, I think that avoiding showpieces requires what I refer to as deep localization, of analysis, design, interaction, dialogue, okay, negotiation, bargaining, trading, making of deals, redesigning, etc., right? Involving all the local stakeholders, relevant stakeholders from the start, okay? And Africans must own the process or it's not going to work. Okay, so this is it's a social process and it's a political process that needs to be informed by evidence, but it's fundamentally social and political. Next slide. Okay, so I talk about what I see as this unavoidable dynamic. Given that it is a social and political dynamic, to work, there has to be trust, right, between players. Trust requires iterative dialogue. You build trust through iterative dialogue and by, in the course of that iterative dialogue, compromising, right? So what does compromising mean? It means then that nobody gets everything they want, and what we end up is what I call, I'll freely admit I stole this term from Ken Opalo, who's at Georgetown University, but he's Kenyan, okay? And he writes on Substack. Some of you might be interested in reading some of his stuff, but nth best solutions. Not first best solutions, not even second best solutions, nth best solutions. The best solution that we can get, given the whole political, social, etc. organizational dynamic, right? And those nth best solutions will be typically far from what analysts might consider best, but they're a heck of a lot better than nothing, right? They're a heck of a lot better than showpieces. Next slide. Okay, so for me, success comes when we have a process that allows this trust building, that has this iterative dialogue, that results in compromises, and that gives us these nth best solutions, right? That is a definition of success. Not some organization that looks great, not some piece of legislation that ticks all the boxes. Next slide. Okay. So, doing this requires behavioral change on both sides of the development equation, all right? Really living this out. So next slide, please. So, for outside partners like MSU, okay, it means working in equitable partnerships, which is something that we have to be constantly thinking about. What does it mean, right? What does equitable partnership mean? Doing this with local organizations to generate the high quality evidence, right? And accepting that this evidence, will not, cannot, even should not be the sole thing that drives the kind of decision making, right? So, we could talk forever about what equitable partnerships are, but essentially a lot of it has to do with us giving up control, right? Us ceding, because the fact is we've had the ownership of the agenda for way too long, right? Ceding ownership to our local partners and really, but engaging them with them seriously, also about our points of view, their points of view, and engaging on this. Next slide. Okay, so for our local organizations, you all need to understand this social and political process. You need to accept that that's what you're dealing with, right? You're not just technicians. You need to be willing to engage with it. And I'm actually super encouraged by what I see by the centers, right? What I saw in Ghana when I was there, what I see with PILOF, with its policy influence centers, the way it's kind of rolling out with other universities, what it's doing, with BOM and all its activities, EPRC and its activities. I'm very, very encouraged. I think you all get it, frankly, and I think one of the figures that Milu is going to present shows that the state policymaker and stakeholder engagements, some of them informal, some of them formal, have increased the most and are the most numerous among the types of outreach that the centers are doing. So to me, you all as centers really get it. What you also need is to have a key eye. Let's go to the next slide. You need to have a keen eye as well for technical improvements that can be made to policy proposals, programmatic proposals, right? That can both make it through the political social process, right? And actually be implemented with existing local capacities. You need to have a keen eye for that, because local ownership does not mean that we think that every piece of policy and program that goes forward is great and couldn't be improved, okay? And you need to have a keen eye for opportunities to shift the way that policymakers and stakeholders think about these issues, okay? Next slide. Okay, for donors, donors need to realize that things I say I'm glad I said will take longer. Will take longer. You know, they'll take longer this way, although it depends on what you're measuring, right? It depends on what you're measuring. Mistakes together with systematic reflection will drive learning, right? So people and organizations, including Michigan State, needs to be allowed to make mistakes, right, and learn from those mistakes. Outputs might be fewer, okay, through this kind of approach, although, you know what? PRCI with its partners, all the centers, you're producing a heck of a lot of output, I'll have to say that, you know. There's a lot of research being done, getting written up, getting presented and so forth. So there's quite a lot of output from this. And outcomes, certainly, the changes that really matter to people's lives and the ability sustainably to continue that should be greater. Next slide. Okay, so my final slide. About ANAPRI, because we're going to segue now into, I think it's Milu's presentation with where they made a systematic assessment of what ANAPRI has been doing. I think you'll see that it has made tremendous progress. There's just no question about that in terms of its, ANAPRI is now a player on the continental scene, right? This is a big deal. They're very involved in the rollout of the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit and other activities, right? And they are seen as a local organization. That's part of the reason for it. And then also, centers are showing that they are very focused on stakeholders and policymakers. That's what I was referring to before. I'm very impressed with that. And ANAPRI has a clear competitive advantage, it seems to me, and that's that it really is African, okay? Obviously, you get funding from donors, but you are and have always been led by Africans, right? And you're making your own decisions. You don't report to any external organization other than, of course, having to be responsive to donors. Everybody who gets money to do things needs to be responsive to that, okay? And I think ANAPRI needs to kind of calmly and persistently, you know, stand on that they are an African organization, okay? I would encourage the Secretariat to always remember, even if it's as it's building central capacity with a research director, with an executive director, with the policy, with a modeling services center, right? Even as it does that, to the Secretariat to remember that fundamentally it needs to serve the centers, right? And it needs to project their work. Because without the centers, ANAPRI is nothing, right? Without the centers, ANAPRI is nothing. So that's my encouragement there. So thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to the rest of the...
Thank you, Professor Dave. Thank you for the opening remarks. And we see he has brought out some of the most important elements that can be done by different stakeholders in making sure that we have local-led development. Now to hear more, just from the centers, from the survey, let me invite Dr. Milu Muyanga, who is an associate professor in the Department of Agricultural, Food and Resource Economics at the Michigan State University. Dr. Milu has successfully established a well-managed, funded, internationally recognized research program. He has worked with Tegemeo, which is one of the ANAPRI centers. He worked with the government in Kenya for some time. So he has got a lot of experience. And he also won the first prize on best research on household exposure to risk. Yeah. So let's hear from him. He did a survey looking at the effects of this capacity building in research centers in Africa. Karibu.
Let's see whether this clicker works.
You know, you have 30 minutes, but the MC took something like 7 minutes, so I'll penalize you. So I'll give you 25 minutes.
Okay. Great. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's going to be tough for me without the clicker, but I will try my best. Yeah. It's always difficult to speak after you are a major professor. Somebody who has mentored you for the last 20 years. Exactly, yeah. But I'll try. Yeah, I'm here to present this work, which we did for the ANAPRI centers, together with my colleague, whom I think most of you know, Professor Thomas Jane. And we are just trying to assess the capacities that exist in the ANAPRI centers. And I think we can move to the next slide. Yes. By way of introduction, let me also confess that I stole this slide from that sentence from a presentation that was done by Dave yesterday, that evidence-based policymaking is a gold standard. Because we know donors and everybody has been encouraging African countries to use evidence in coming up with policies. And if that doesn't happen, you know what normally happens. Most of the cases, policies are driven by preconceived ideologies, intuitions, gut feelings, political expedience, or what we call eyeballing. Oh yeah, things are going this way, they must go that way, when you don't have evidence. Can we just have all the lines up down there? Yeah, great. So what we know is that in the absence of evidence, there is something else that we normally tend to do, cut and paste. You go to other countries and you borrow policies there and you come and paste them in Africa. Yet, we know African countries are very different. What can work in Tanzania may not work in Kenya. Actually, it may not even work in West Africa. So we need, policies that are kind of informed by evidence from specific countries. And with the time, we've seen the emergence of policy think tanks. And the good example is the ANAPRI 16 centers that are kind of, found in Africa. And they are really doing a good job in terms of informing policy-making processes in these countries. And they employ various ways of communicating their evidence, including workshops like these ones, media, social media, sometimes in private spaces. There are evidence that maybe the government needs, but some of us may think that by bashing them in the newspapers and increasing your visibility, you are winning. But in some instances, we may even meet with the policymakers in those private spaces and you talk to them about the fertilizer subsidies. They tell you, yes, we know, it doesn't work. But what do you want us to do? It's like, okay, if you could trick it like this and this, maybe it could work for your country. That one, you don't need to go to the newspapers. You just meet with them in a very private space and you talk to them. Next. Yeah, there's a point there I wanted to mention, but you don't need to go back there about, the speed with which policy making takes place. Something happens, COVID happens, policymakers want solutions. There's a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Policymakers need evidence. They won't take that kind of, let's wait until we publish, let's wait until, no, you have to move quickly. So, yes, policy think tanks need to be ready to respond to policymakers. Great. So these are the hypotheses. I think the hypotheses are already in the booklet that you have. That, it's perceived that, Africa lacks the human capacity, Africa lacks the financial resources, and our institutions are typically weak. This is what we wanted to assess to find out whether this is the truth of the matter or not. Let's move to the next slide. This is just about the survey design, very technical, so we may not want to go there. I just wanted actually the one that you skipped, yes. Let's go back. Yes, I just wanted to show you about, whom the survey focused. We interviewed, or you are meant to interview all the 16 directors of the ANAPRI centers, research directors, at least 2 senior research fellows in those institutions, 2 research fellows, research analysts, but you can see the response rate. Actually, some of our bosses were saying, your questionnaires were too long. I'm like, have you ever seen the MRAUs or the RAUs in Zambia? They take like 3 hours and, we take these things for granted. So yes, that was just, by the way. Let's move to the next slide. Great. Here, before I move to the results, there's something, a question I wanted us to think about when policymakers really need evidence, whom do they go to? And why do they go to these particular sources? And one of our colleagues, Manish and I think Daniel, did a survey in Senegal here, Nigeria, and Uganda. And the results you will see will shock some of us who normally think about, every time we think about evidence, we think about journal publications with high impact factors. Next slide. Next. Yes, that's what the story is. Out of the government and non-government stakeholders, most of them said they rely on institutional reports, not even journal articles. Why? Because they want evidence that is readily available. So they will go for those working papers if they exist, or other reports that exist in the country. Let's move forward for the sake of time. Then the researchers try to go for these ones. They are listed there. I trust the quality, the reliability, and the independence of the analytics. Oh, they are very innovative. They use multidisciplinary and approaches, and their research is impactful. Oh, that up to the point of where they say providing timely information on current topics. So if you don't do this, you remain irrelevant to the stakeholders. I just wanted to mention that before we dive into the results. Next slide. Next. Yes, so do the ANAPRI centers have the requisite capacity to deliver on their mandate? Let's go to the next slide, where we looked at, the number of technical staff in these institutions. And on this one, we went back to 2020, 2015, 2020, and 2024. And you can see we looked at full-time staff, part-time staff, short-time staff for reporting institution. Yes, some research centers said, going back to 2010, we couldn't recall. So maybe 2020, 2024 could give a more trustworthy number. As you can see from these results, in the full-time staff, you can see researchers with the PhD have increased from an average of 3 in 2010 to almost 8 in 2024, which is really impressive. And these are people with good PhDs from good institutions, either in Africa or out of Africa. Then part-time staff, if you can't afford the full-time, you normally go out there and look for part-time staff, and you can see the numbers also has been on the increase from 0.8 in 2015 to an average of 3. Then short-term contracts, of course. You don't need to have everybody in. You may need somebody who is experienced in something like climate change. You may not need one full-time, but you should have one somewhere so that when you need that person, you can just dash there and make use of his or her services. Next one. Well, there are animations there, but now they are not coming out, so let's just move. Yeah, you ruined the thing. Okay. We also looked at the academic qualifications of different people we have in these organizations, and as you can see, the orange is the ones with PhD. Yeah, blue is MSc. 70% of all the executive directors in these centers are PhDs, 30% MScs. Research directors, 83%. All the way to research fellows is 71%. Research analysts, that's the entry grade. So most of them have MScs. With the time, they will just go and further their studies, and they will come back and rejoin as research fellows. Yeah, then next we looked at something that we normally know about the administration and the communication. We always focus on the technical bit of it, yet forgetting that there are some people who are supposed to process for interest when you are going to the field. Or you have 4 research fellows producing evidence, and you have only one comms person to take that evidence to the world. Yeah, those are important, and I think we also need to pay attention to that, and you can see the numbers. They've been growing, meaning that these institutions are realizing how important these roles are. Yeah, but communication still remains low. Let's move to the next one. Then about research outputs, here we looked at publication types, working papers, policy briefs, next page gonna be journal articles and all that. And we looked at different years, 2010 to 2014, all the way to 2020, 2024. And we tried grouping, the amount of research that is coming from these institutions. 0 produced these working papers. How many? What percentage produced that? What percentage produced 1 to 2? What percentage produced 3? Then over 5. That's the second column there. And as you can see, the number of policy think tanks ANAPRI affiliated that have been producing 0 has really come down, which is a good thing. And the ones that are producing more than 5 in specific time periods has increased. Not really increased, but stayed almost stable at 60. So they may need to do more on that front. Then when it comes to policy briefs, which we said are very important because they are quick to produce and inform policy making processes, the numbers have increased from 40% to 70%, which is impressive. Next. Journal publications, you can see them there. Yeah, manuscript presented been on the increase with the institutions producing 0, reducing, and the ones who are producing more than 5 on the increase. And then there are journals in different tiers. This is classification based on, I think it comes from CG centers. Yeah, so we also ask for this information to get to know, because this is, it's a signal of the quality of the research that is coming from these institutions. Next. Great. We also, yes, talking about impact factors, very important. So we grouped, impact factors into groups 0 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, wanting to know, which institution, the proportion of institutions that are publishing in different journals of different impact factors. And as you can see, most of them, 60% impact factor between 0 to 2, then 3 to 5, 32%. 8, 6 to 8, 8%, and these are food policy, all that, and these are, high caliber journals. So we need to target for this just to kind of show the quality of research that comes from our institutions. Next. In institutions outreach, yes, after we generate the research, are we going out there to share our results with the policymakers? And this question was leveled to research fellows and senior research fellows. And you can see, again, classification based on time, 2020, 2024, it's supposed to be the other way around. Yeah, but as you can see, most of of these researchers are publishing, not publishing, but using stakeholder and policy maker sessions to make, their presentation, which are very relevant because, there is where the policymakers who are doing the things in the country. And again, it's also important to publish in the national, not to publish, but to present, make presentation in regional and national conferences. Again, that also reflects the quality of the research that is emerging from your respective institutions. Next. Then we also sought to know whether these institutions have websites. And as you can see, 88% said they have. But again, we need to remember, it's not just having a website. It is how regularly is this website being updated. I know I just casually went to some and I could see they have very dated information. We should just keep our website up to date with current information, because sometimes the policymakers don't know what you have in your, at your institution. But when you just put it out there, they will see it and they will make use of it. Or they will even come to you and ask for more information about it. Institutional governance. How are we governing these institutions? First of all, we sought to know how they are constituted, whether they are part of public university, parastate, or whether they are private companies and all that, and the results you can see. But this is just from the reporting institutions. Most of them are part of a university, and very few of them are private or private. And all these ways of constitution comes with advantages and disadvantages. Yes, we may say, the ones that are aligned to your university, they are more sustainable because they can draw resources from the university in case donors don't give them money. But again, there are also challenges involved. We know sometimes we have that, the African factor, whereby whenever the ED of a policy think tank is driving a bigger car than the vice chancellor, it becomes a bigger problem. Actually, they can't even understand why you even have a bigger salary than him. Yet institutions like where you work, our football coach earns more than the president. Those are the African factor problems that need to be dealt with. going forward. Next. Okay, how about board? That is, those are capable of holding these institutions' management accountable. 70% said, yes, we have a board. We are yet to kind of look at these results from, like responses from different, members of staff in the institution, because the director would say, yes, we are good. We have a board which is accountable. But the researchers think otherwise. So this is something we may need to deep dive into to get to see what's going on. Then when it comes to the terms in office, most of them was unlimited. I don't know what good they are doing. These institutions are at this stage forever. Only a minority of them had directors with like 2 terms. First term, 4 years, second term, another 4 years. Even if you are good as what, you go. Somebody else, new brains coming to steer this institution. Then in terms of number of board meetings they had in 2023, most of them had like 4, which may be on quarterly basis. Next. Financial sustainability, we also wanted to know the types of grants that they get, whether they are core budget support or activity-based, and the role that they play in these particular grants. And as you can see from the first 2 bars, most of the grants now are more of activity-based. And very few, 34%, are general support. We know the challenges involved in this. Whoever pays the piper, yeah, so there could be a problem there. When you have like general budget support, at least you have some more flexibility. And then when you look at the roles they play, impressive to see most of them are taking a lead role, and then, sub-grantees, all that, 27%. Then in terms of amounts, we wanted to know like how much grants are receiving in those categories, 0 to 50, this per year, 50 to 100. And as you can see, when it comes to core budget support, I don't know why that bar turned to green, supposed to be blue. Yes, most of them were receiving grants in that range, 100 to 200K. And then, of course, we can see some of them are making it to 1 million, 30%. And then when it comes to activity budgets, just small, 50 to 100. Because these are assignment specific. I want you to do something for them, and then you do it. Okay, suggestions for improvement. We asked them, all the respondents, like, what should we do to improve the performance of these institutions? That within the control of the management, development partners, and the external research partners. Next. This is within the management of, control of the management, and you can see, improve number of sustainable funding. That has been a problem. And then engage capacity development and training, increase number of technical staff, increase remuneration, of course, everybody will say that. Then enhance institutional governance, transparency, everything is down there. It will be shared with you, all the factors that were mentioned. Here we are just showing the top 10, and also they improve the work environment. I've been to some of them, and they are just crammed together because of lack of space and all that. So yeah, some of them kind of need to have like expanded space. Then international and donors give us more money. That's what they are saying. Yeah, so please increase levels of funding to this institution, and more so core budget support. Provide long-term funding. That's straightforward. Engage local institutions as lead primes. Then provide core funding as opposed to project-based. So they've said it all, not from me. Then how about the external research partners? There is a call for them to foster a collaboration among research institutions, capacity building of researchers, create exchange visits, engage more local think tanks as consultants, not just going to consultants. Let's support our policy think tank. Let's not go to those briefcase consultants in these countries. Conclusion. Yes, I think this statement, Zena talked about it, where I don't need to repeat it, that most of whatever we are doing in Africa is determined outside there. But just to answer, to the questions and the hypotheses that we had put forward, are our local institutions that weak? Do they lack human resource? I don't think they do. I think the human resource is there. Very qualified, you saw that. with the relevant experience and producing good research, which can be published in journals and all that. How about finances? That should be the next one. That has been the problem. Okay, but let's just go to communication first. Yes, I think we have a problem with this, whereby we are producing a lot, but we are not pushing beyond the shelves to where the policymakers are. So that's something you may need to look at. And then in terms of financial resources, another important factor which is kind of slowing down our institutions. For example, with these short-term grants, you may not hire high-quality staff. If you want to hire somebody who has a good PhD, at least you need to give them a contract of like 3-5 years. But you can't just ask somebody with a PhD to come and work for you for 1 year. That one will be like, so what after that 1 year? Then in terms of institutional management and governance, something that we may need to look at. When you hear like they are board that exists forever. No offense, but some of these things is because of maybe capture. Maybe the management captures the board, or the board captures the management. And I don't think that is something we would want, happen in Africa. Next. Yes, I think this is the last slide, and thank you so much, Merci beaucoup. Mbele iko sawa. Oh, it's fine. It's positive, looks positive.
Thank you, Dr. Melu. I knew you could do within the time. Actually, I have saved some few minutes. Thank you very much. Just to echo on how he concluded, Dr. Melu, from the presentation, he highlighted the two main things that carry all the messages. One of it is that contrary to what we've been hearing, or contrary to the prevailing opinion, African institutions have the human capacity to effectively deliver their mandate. But there are some constraints that we need to sort out, yeah? He said issues of to adapt with the resources constraints is still there. There's pressure on timely delivery of the policies and so forth. So there are things that they can be handled. And those are the things we'll need to discuss today. The other thing that he really mentioned and emphasized in the communication and engagement. How do we make constructive strategic engagement? Yeah, so those are the things also we can discuss when we get time. How do we assist our government to respond to some of the public criticism? So when we give recommendations, we know some of the recommendations might give government hard time to work on. How are we going now to make sure that they're going to do it in a better way? And then he also said, in terms of communication, we need, if I reflect also from Professor Dev, how to communicate. We need to build long relationships, and for that we need to build the trust, and that one can take time. So those are the things we'll need to discuss. So before we go to the discussion, I would like now to invite the panelists, the key people, to do a discussion. We have development partners, our donors. We have 2 in the room, and 1 is online. I hope we're going to be connected online. I have Dr. Binyam Iyop. If you can come forward, please. If you can sit here. Professor Binyam serves as a senior policy advisor in the Strategy and Policy Division within the Feed the Future Office of Policy Analysis and Engagement at the United States Agency for International Development. Welcome, Prof. Then we have online, we're going to have Dr. David Defiri from FAO, Sub-Regional Coordinator for Southern Africa. I'm sure the communication people, you're going to connect him. And then we have another partner, Alan Remison. Alan is a senior program officer in the agricultural development team at the Gates Foundation. Alan oversees a portfolio of policy initiatives delivered by the African Network of Agricultural Policy Research Institutes. the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, and the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. Yeah, Alan, we've been working with him for some time now. Most welcome, Alan. Then we are also going to hear from the research centers, their experience. And here I have three people. I have Dr. Astu Kamara, who is the Director of Bureau of Microeconomic Analysis at the Senegalese Institute of Agri Research, ISRA. She has led various initiatives, including the coordination of the pastoralism and dry area roles. So she's also going to, ISRA is one of the centers of ANAPRI, so she's going to share her views in relation to the presentation. Then I have Dr. Agabenda Adekoya. Dr. Agabenda Adekoya is a professor in the Department of Agriculture Extension and Rural Development, University of Ibadan. Professor is the co-principal investigator for PILAF. So, Prof, most welcome. Then I have Dr. Nali Shebo Mebelo. She ran away from ANAPRI. We miss you. She's now with ART Global. Yes, yes. Okay. Dr. Nali Shebo is the African leader for USAID Comprehensive Action for Climate Change now, implemented by APT Global. She supports countries in their effort to design and update climate policies and implement adaptation plans. But before, she was working with ANAPRI. So, okay, so these are the people we're going to have a discussion with. So let me move out of here. Just a moment. Okay, now, Dr. Binam, we have heard the presentation, we've heard from the opening remarks from Professor Dev, and we know that USAID has been implementing a localization strategy for some years now, with a deliberate focus on putting local institutions at the forefront of policy engagement reforms. How successful has USAID localization agenda have been? If you can tell us a bit on that one. And how can local institutions be more strengthening the capacity of African research institutions to influence policy? So if you can quickly reflect on that.
Can you hear me now? Okay, good. I'm very soft-spoken, so I like microphones when I speakers. So I was given 5 minutes or something to reflect. So I thought to myself, I better write it down to stay on time. I hope that helps. So first, I just want to thank the organizers of the 11th ANAPRI conference and the session for designing this highly relevant and timely session. A fundamental principle of Feed the Future and USAID is supporting locally led development. In part, this means aligning our efforts with regional and national priorities, like building a partnership with ANAPRI and supporting its objectives. So since I was asked by ANAPRI to talk about, I was thinking about it from two frameworks about what strategies have worked in strengthening the capacity of African research institutes to influence policy, and second, how can research institutions better position themselves as key players in the policy decision processes via localization? I hope we can discuss and learn from these points and incorporate any salient takeaways into our partnership and work moving forward. So I propose the following 4 interrelated, overlapping ideas for discussion. First, before I say anything first, Milu and others have talked about It's not me telling you how to build your capacities. It's more about something from mine and my organization's perspective, my colleagues, what we think these 4 ideas are, and then we're, of course, willing to be led by you and to discuss it moving forward. So first, local policy research institutes need to produce high-quality, relevant data analysis and research, such as presented by Milu and Dave. This means conduct rigorous, evidence-based research that it gives them trainings on emotional intelligence and many other things. So those who are engaged in and advocating for policy change must be able to understand what your evidence shows about the distribution of benefits, the linkage in systems, and how they are impacted by policy changes. This means to provide the evidence and make sure everyone understands the implications. Who among your staff will have the skill set and have learned how to communicate their results to a broader international audience? How do you build a supportive network among competing interest groups? Collaborate with other research institutes, civil society organizations, and international partners to amplify impact and leverage diverse expertise. So this means also, how do you make yourself to be indispensable to the government, yet also maintain some level of independence? This might require some skill in diplomacy, of course. So these four ideas, they are very interrelated and overlapping, as I have said. And thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm really looking forward to engaging and learning from you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Binyam, for giving us some of the strategies, some of the elements that we can focus on to fill the gaps. Now let's hear from online. I'm not sure if Dr. David Firi is online. Dr. Firi, yeah, he's online. Dr. Firi, can you hear us? Dr. Firi? Okay, while the IT is working on Dr. Firi's, I think let's move to another developed partner, Mr. Alan Renson. You've been working with ANAPRI, yeah? And you've heard the presentation. If you can look at the challenges and some of the lessons that BMGF, your organization, has experienced in supporting state capacity and local partners in driving policy reforms. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. And then if you can also touch on what support is needed to intensify the localization of plans. So if you can talk about that one, most welcome.
Sure. Thanks, Zena. And just to echo Biniam's thanks to the organisers and ANAPRI for putting on the conference, as you do every year. It's always a really great event to be able to attend, and it's a privilege for me to represent the Gates Foundation here in Dakar this week. So in terms of why ANAPRI, why do we support ANAPRI? Well, policy making in agriculture on the continent and in food systems faces this really tough problem of multiple competing policy objectives. So governments through the agriculture sector, through the food system, have to deliver objectives around poverty, growth, jobs, diet quality, women's empowerment, and now climate adaptation, and so on. And that's a really difficult set of objectives for any government anywhere to try to achieve. So it calls for good quality analysis of policy options, good interrogation of the evidence, and good articulation and assessment of the trade-offs associated with different with the implementation of different policy instruments, different agricultural value chains, public investments, and so on. And so with that problem in mind, we believe that ANAPRI and the centres have a really important role to play in the solution to that problem. So the generation of high quality evidence, engagement and advice with national governments and state governments in the implementation of the right policies to address that multitude of policy challenges. So we also believe in investing in tools rather than specific policy agendas. So the Gates Foundation is not coming with a set of policy recommendations that we, the Gates Foundation, believe are the right set of policy recommendations. Rather, we're investing in the application, the deployment of policy analytical tools. We'll hear more about this tomorrow. But in the capacity of the centres, right? And you as the people engaging on a day-to-day basis with national governments in the policy discourse, what is it that, how can we support that local capacity to deliver high-quality evidence, high-quality advice? So that's a really key piece of why we invest in ANAPRI. And part of the reason is to be demand responsive. This came through a little bit in Milu's presentation. But sort of this balance of generating longer-term research, that's produced in journal articles and is coming out of the university system on the long-term trends, really critical, and that should not stop But at the same time, centres have to be demand responsive, to be relevant, to be practical, and to be of value to the national governments of the countries that they reside in. So enhancing that demand responsiveness is key. And ensuring quality rather than quantity of research outputs. It was one of the things I was quite struck by as well in the presentation. Quite a focus on the number of articles, the number of policy briefs and so on, but it's the quality of that analysis that's really critical. Economics and policy making is a very intricate dance, and it's easy to get it wrong. And the better quality analysis that you can bring to bear, the greater confidence policymakers have in the courses of action that are in front of them and the choices that they make. So in terms of, Zena, your question on challenges and support. So something that we've seen, we've been supporting ANAPRI now for, I'll get this wrong, in 2 different phases of work for 6 or 7 years. And a key challenge we've seen repeatedly is sustaining government engagement, right? So we can, through the ANAPRI centres, offer tools, offer analytical outputs, offer advice, offer analysis. But if there's turnover of government side people, champions of that engagement, it can be a reset, it can be start again. And that's really challenging, that's really frustrating, frankly, for the centres involved. Many of you in the room have experienced that. So I don't know what the answer to that is, other than building the brand of the centres, building the reputation of the centres through regular engagement that transcends different ministers, different permanent secretaries, different representatives over time, because that is a real challenge. It also just, again, as it came through in the presentation, it takes time to build capacity, right? You know, we're not trying to, well, we have done this in the past, but we're not trying to create lots and lots of new PhDs. We're trying to support skills development in advanced analytical tools, in modern forms of policy analysis that can be deployed quite quickly. It doesn't take years and years of training to build capacity on some of these things. They can be applied pretty quickly. So it doesn't have to be this long, slow journey. There's an element of that, of course, but there are things that can be brought to bear, skills and capabilities that can be brought to bear quickly. I did spot the histogram that said funding on it as being the big priority from the development community. And yes, that is really important. We absolutely understand that. It's that desire for core support is common across all of the partners that the Gates Foundation at least works with. Everybody wants core support, and we can provide some of that, but not all of what is probably required. Very far from it. The Gates Foundation has a lot of money, but it's a tiny drop in the ocean of the funding that is required over the longer term. And so what is the role of governments in paying for the services of local think tanks? How far are we away from that demand and supply relationship being very real and very practical? I know that is definitely the case in some countries in which there are ANAPRI centres, but it's very far away in others. So it's, you know, what's the status of that? And so, yeah, I think that sort of summarises some of the key pieces. So being demand responsive, being very practical and relevant, also a focus on market-led. So, and an expansion of that concept is kind of private sector-focused policy making, right? And, you know, what does that really entail? Well, it entails engagement with the private sector. And that's a different muscle to develop that goes beyond what is usually in the core set of skills of a policy analyst. How do you engage with the private sector? How do you assess their policy needs? How do you articulate policy reforms that elicit market responses that are beneficial to local SMEs and the smallholders that engage with them? That's a big area of focus and support that we think, as the Gates Foundation, we can support. And then the final piece that I'll mention is tracking implementation. So the policy landscape on the continent is often very dominated by planning. Forward-looking, what are the priorities? What's the long list of actions that governments need to take? And there's often frustration around a lack of implementation. Well, how do we know? We have to be able to track implementation. And so a question that we're increasingly asking ANAPRI and the other partners that we work with is, how do you track and assess the extent of policy implementation? It's too easy from the other side of the world to point the finger and say, oh, nothing gets implemented. We don't actually know that. We don't have good data with which to track and assess the extent of policy implementation. So with that, I'll say thank you, Zena.
Thank you, Alan. Yes, you have raised some important information, challenges, I can say. The issue of sustaining government engagement. That's, I'm sure we'll hear more from the floor about that one. Tracking implementation has been one of the positive elements that make more engagement of the government. So I think we'll hear more from the floor on these contributions. Now back to the online, yes, Dr. Phiri, most welcome.
Thank you.
I've introduced you.
Thank you very much.
And if I can ask you a question, I hope you heard the presentation from Dr. Milu, and maybe you were also there when Professor Devi was doing opening remarks for the session. So you're working with...
Yeah.
Thanks. So you're working with FAO, and given the extensive experience that you have with FAO, what are the key factors that needed to ensure that capacity building efforts led to long-term sustainability and reduced reliance on international organizations? If you can respond on that one. And if you can add a bit on how can research institutions better position themselves as key players in policy-making process?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I'm sorry I could not be in Dakar with you as I wished I should. We have very good collaboration with ANAPRI over the years, and ANAPRI before that, and I think they're doing the centers are doing a great job. Some we have, as FAO, we have worked with to a great acclaim, in my view. So I think they are generally doing a great job. There might be a missing link here and there, but that's why we are here. So let us remind ourselves first of how policy is formulated. We have the traditional policy cycle, which starts with identification of the problem, because if there's no problem, there's no need for policy change, of course. And then, but to identify a problem, you need evidence, and I think this is extremely important for the centers to not just help identify what the main problems might be and how they might be solved. And sometimes those problems may not even need to be solved using any policy change or any policy reform. There could be other instruments could use. If policy is to be done, then of course the centers can also help with policy formulation, whereby they provide policy options and implications for each one of those policy options. And then the next stage, of course, is because of this policy formulation, decisions have to be made on which policy to implement based on the options that have been provided by the center or otherwise. And then the more difficult part is implementation. I think my predecessor in this panel just said it. There are a lot of policies, a lot of plans in place, but we have no way of tracking implementation. And I think policy centers should also be able to provide, to help set up the indicators for this thing. Then another missing part of the policy cycle is the evaluation. How have we done? But because policy implementation takes so long, people forget what the policy was set out to be to start with, and therefore they do not evaluate, and then revise accordingly to see if they need to restart adjustments in the policy. So that's the policy cycle in brief. But the direct question to me was how I can ensure capacity building efforts lead to long-term sustainability in policy implementation. I would consider several factors. One of them is, of course, this strong evidence generation. Secondly, making sure that you have got good stakeholder engagement. In other words, inclusivity as much as you can, involving various stakeholders, government agencies, civil society, and so on. The capacity building also has to be tailored to what the policy program is supposed to do. So tailoring the training programs to meet the specific needs and targets of the target groups. And then institutional support. Usually, this is one of the weaker parts for government. Sometimes they need institutional restructuring, even of the offices, of the organizations, and so on. So sometimes policy centers can do this, but often they may need support from other actors. But this is also important sometimes if the capacity building efforts are going to bear fruit. My predecessor also mentioned the issue of resource availability. You need the resources to sustain capacity building. It's a long-term process. You cannot do capacity building for 1 or 2 years and then you think you have sufficiently capacitated the institution that you would like to. So it has to be sustained with resource availability over the long term. I will also include monitoring and evaluation, how that capacity development is happening, find out how it is doing from the actors themselves, and then retailer the capacity development based on the experience, as well as policy integration, making sure that you are incorporating capacity building into broader policy frameworks. Now, to your second question on how they can position themselves, the first thing I would say is credible leadership of the institution. It's very, very important for governments to know that that institution is headed and is manned by people that can be trusted. So it's very, very important. That's the first thing. The second thing is effective communication. Someone mentioned the policy brief area on, but they have to be tailored to the needs of the policymakers. Policymakers are there usually for political expediency. How do you support them get what they want with the policy instrument, while also helping them to move away from other elements that may not be good for the country? So effective communication is extremely important. And thirdly, continuous strengthening of partnerships, both with government and other actors. And fourthly, I would say availability. Be available when the actors need to work with you. I have a few more facts, but I see that time I'm already exceeding my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Phil. I really like this group. They're keeping their time. Thank you very much. Now we have heard from the development partners.
Advancing Africa's agriculture.
Now let's come back.
Through policy research and influence.
Because these are the people who have been in the field. So if they can tell us their experience. So I start with you, Dr. Astu. So you've heard about communication that has been how to engage the government, how to engage the stakeholders in the process of policy development, policy making. So if you can tell us experience of ISRABAM, how did you improve on communication, and how did PRSI assist you in terms of capacity building to make sure that the engagement is improved?
Merci. Je vais être la première à parler en français aujourd'hui. Donc, je voudrais profiter de cette prise de parole pour souhaiter la bienvenue à toutes ces délégations qui sont arrivées d'un peu partout, membres du réseau ANAPRI. Donc, soyez les bienvenus au Sénégal, en attendant que la session de cet après-midi vous la souhaite de façon beaucoup plus solennelle et plus protocolaire avec nos autorités. Je pense qu'ils ont besoin de mettre leur... I'm sorry.
For anyone that needs translation, you can get the
Anyone needs translation.
The earphones in
I'm
the
not
back.
comfortable in English and no.
I'm sure, MC, you're taking note of my time that's being stolen by other assignments.
I'm sorry, we have losing time. Mais vous êtes au Sénégal, on va vous parler français et vous allez faire l'effort de comprendre la traduction. Parfois, si vous êtes courageux, vous nous écoutez, on va parler lentement et vous allez comprendre. Ce sera peut-être l'occasion également de se mettre devant. On ne comprend pas pourquoi nos invités se mettent derrière. Il y a de la place devant, ça nous encourage quand on vous voit près de nous.
Everyone in the back, we invite you to come closer.
Yeah.
Take the closer seats, please. Thank you. Thank you, Lifatu. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Oh là là, on va perdre du temps, hein, mais bon, c'est pas grave.
Well, I think so far the lessons shared by our panelists remind us of the transformative power of investing in local institutions to shape impactful policies. I think this discussion has set the tone for the rest of the conference. It highlights the importance of strengthening African-led research to drive sustainable development across the continent. Let us take these valuable insights along with those coming with Dr. Astu and the rest of the panelists as we continue exploring how to translate policy into practice.
Is it okay for everyone?
We will resume in 2 minutes. I think we are almost there.
Je pense que je peux commencer à répondre à la question. Merci. La question qui est discutée ce matin soulève les grands défis qui se posent à nous, centres de recherche, parce qu'on nous demande à la fois de produire de la recherche de qualité. Cette recherche de qualité doit être impactante pour les politiques publiques. Ce qui est demandé à nos centres de recherche sur les politiques publiques, c'est de traduire plusieurs perspectives de recherche en décision. Déjà, il faut qu'on les traduise en enjeux politiques pour que nos décideurs politiques se rendent compte de l'ampleur et de la nécessité de faire attention à ces résultats de recherche. Mais en plus de cela, ces résultats doivent être traduits en messages clairs, capables d'influencer la décision politique. Ce qui n'est pas très facile ni évident dans nos contextes, parce qu'on se rend compte que nos politiques publiques sont en face de plusieurs arbitrages qui sont très complexes pour eux, pour diverses raisons. Donc, on ne va pas rentrer sur ces raisons-là. Mais en tant que centre de recherche sur les politiques publiques, dans un grand centre de recherche agronomique, nous avons plusieurs défis à relever. Et ces 4 dernières années, l'expérience que nous avons eue avec le PRCI nous a montré ô combien il était important d'être focus sur certaines missions qui sont attendues de nous. Et l'une de ces missions, en tout cas pour le BAM, c'est d'aider la prise de décision. Donc la prise de décision des politiques publiques, la prise de décision d'autres types d'acteurs qui sont les producteurs réunis dans des collectifs organisés, mais également de produire de la recherche qui sensibilise la société civile. Et nous nous sommes rendus compte que c'est plusieurs métiers. Et ces métiers-là, il fallait les avoir au sein de notre institution. Et donc, le travail que nous avons pu faire avec le PRCI nous a démontré au moins 3 choses. Donc, ces 3 choses-là, il était nécessaire de faire un renforcement de nos capacités institutionnelles. Il était nécessaire de faire un renforcement de nos capacités de recherche. Il était également nécessaire de nous inscrire dans des masses critiques de recherche plus larges, des réseaux qui nous permettait de travailler au-delà du Sénégal, parce que ces défis de l'agriculture, nous les partageons avec d'autres pays. Et donc, ce sont ces 3-là que je vais essayer de développer rapidement dans mon temps. Alors, concernant le renforcement des capacités institutionnelles, le diagnostic que nous avons pu faire avec le PRCI au départ du travail nous a démontré facilement que nous n'avions pas les équipes qu'il fallait pour adresser ces missions-là. Et donc, ça a commencé déjà par nous rendre compte de la nécessité d'avoir des ressources humaines de qualité. On nous a parlé tout à l'heure de recherche de qualité. Pour fournir de la recherche de qualité, il faut avoir des ressources humaines de qualité, que ce soit dans des domaines de la recherche, de la communication, de l'appui à la science, de l'appui administratif. Donc, dans tous ces domaines-là, il fallait avoir des recherches humaines de qualité. Donc, ça nous a poussé à travailler à renforcer ces capacités-là en interne, mais également, dans la mesure du possible, à ouvrir nos équipes et à recruter des ressources humaines de qualité. Alors, par rapport à ces ressources humaines, je pense que tous nos petits centres de recherche sur les politiques publiques font face au même type de problèmes pour retenir ces profils-là de pointe. C'est extrêmement difficile aujourd'hui en Afrique de l'Ouest de retenir un bon statisticien. Or, dans les types d'études que nous faisons, nous avons besoin de ce type de profil-là. Avoir un profil qui soit capable de faire une analyse de politique publique, ce n'est pas une compétence qu'on acquiert facilement à l'université, donc c'est plusieurs perspectives qu'on matche. Et quand on arrive à trouver un bon profil, le garder également pose un certain nombre de problèmes. Donc, les défis, nous continuons encore à les rencontrer, mais dans le cadre du PRCI, nous avons au moins pu comprendre que c'était nécessaire d'avoir ces profils-là, c'était nécessaire de les garder, et c'était nécessaire d'avoir des recherches qui soient portées par ce type de profil-là. Nous avons pu également nous rendre compte de la nécessité de moderniser les infrastructures et les outils de recherche. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, dans le monde de la science, on ne peut pas faire la recherche tout en n'étant pas à jour. Donc, il y a des outils de recherche aujourd'hui qui sont indispensables, qui vont bientôt devenir classiques. Le Covid nous a démontré ô combien il était important de pouvoir travailler avec des collègues partout dans le monde sans bouger. Donc, il a fallu avoir de très bonnes connexions Internet. Donc, souvent, on n'en parle pas. Mais dès qu'on se retrouve dans un centre déconnecté, c'est difficile. Donc, c'est des choses simples, mais qui sont nécessaires aujourd'hui pour être à jour. Pareil sur certains types d'outils, donc des logiciels, des applications qui permettent d'aller vite et de pouvoir faire certaines recherches. Également, nous nous sommes rendus compte de la nécessité d'améliorer nos capacités de communication. Et ça, c'est très important. Donc, il a fallu nous rendre compte qu'un résultat de recherche, il faut le traduire en message. Ce message-là, il faut savoir le partager avec qui de droit, qui de besoin. Et ça, nous avons pu, grâce au PRCI, déjà pouvoir avoir des compétences en interne qui puissent nous accompagner à faire cela, mais également créer des espaces de dialogue politique. Et ça, en général, c'est des choses qui nous dépassent en tant que chercheurs, avoir des espaces de dialogue où on invite les politiques publiques, les autres acteurs, la société civile. Donc, je pense qu'aujourd'hui, on parle beaucoup des mardis du BAM. Donc, ça a été créé bien avant le PRCI, donc ça fait 20 ans. Mais on l'a, avec le programme PRCI, l'ISRA BAM, a renouvelé, revitalisé ces mardis du BAM. Et nous avons vu aujourd'hui combien c'est important pour tout le monde. Donc, c'est suivi. Et puis, au-delà de l'événement mardi du BAM, on alimente un mardi du BAM par des résultats de recherche. Une fois qu'on a créé le débat autour du thème, il faut se saisir des vraies questions qui intéressent les acteurs des politiques publiques pour continuer la recherche. Et là, on fait face à d'autres types de défis. Comment financer ces priorités de recherche? Et ça m'amène à mon deuxième point sur le renforcement des capacités de recherche. Alors, nous avons compris qu'il était vraiment important qu'on initie des recherches sur nos priorités nationales. Et ça, voilà. La difficulté, c'est de voir comment est-ce qu'on initie. Est-ce qu'on attend d'avoir un financement? Est-ce qu'on initie la réflexion sans financement? Et nous avons testé quelque chose à l'ISRA BAM, donc à l'issue d'une conférence sur le mardi du BAM sur le blé et le pain, donc parce qu'au Sénégal, on consomme beaucoup de pain. Donc, on a vu comment le sujet intéressait à la fois les politiques, mais intéressait également la société civile. Tous les citoyens sénégalais sont intéressés à savoir pourquoi on importe du blé toujours pour faire du pain et que le prix du pain n'est pas fixe. Donc, ce débat-là nous a fait nous rendre compte qu'il était nécessaire de faire au moins deux types de recherches. De comprendre pourquoi dans le processus de panification, donc de fabrication du pain, on n'arrivait pas à avoir du pain qui est fait sur la base de céréales locales. Donc ce travail-là a été mené par un de nos jeunes collègues. Encore aujourd'hui, les résultats intéressent tout le monde et ça fait 2 ans qu'ils présentent ces résultats un peu partout. Donc la presse en parle, les influenceurs sur TikTok en parlent et on voit comment ça intéresse tout le monde. Et nous nous sommes rendus compte que ce n'était pas fini le processus. Il fallait essayer de continuer cette recherche-là pour voir du côté de la demande. Parce que ce que ça montre, c'est que le slogan de consommer local est là. Par contre, la production et la chaîne de valeur n'arrivent pas à encore se structurer aujourd'hui. Et on se rend compte qu'il y a des problèmes qui dépassent même la science politique. C'est des questions de production de céréales, c'est des questions de mise en relation entre différents acteurs de la chaîne de valeur, c'est des questions de processing sur l'industrie locale, etc. Et aujourd'hui, on est face à ce défi-là. Comment continuer cette recherche-là pour alimenter la question? Et voilà, on le fait avec les moyens que nous avons au niveau de l'équipe, mais c'est de petites recherches qui arrivent à soulever de grands débats, comme disait tout à l'heure monsieur. Donc on se rend compte qu'il n'est pas forcément utile de faire beaucoup de recherches, mais une de qualité interpellée. Je pense que je finis mon temps.
Yeah, let me interfere. Thank you very much, Dr. Astu. Yes, you have shown the importance of communication, the importance of building a team, not looking just to the technical people, but also the administration and the communication people in our teams. That's a key to the best experience. Now let me go to Dr. Adekoya from PILAF. if you can also share your experience, how can a local institution partner with government and donors to ensure sustained capacity growth? So if you can talk about your experience. Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Our experience has been that Nigeria is a very vast country, and it's not easy getting that direct link with government agencies or policymakers. However, we started from our state, that's our own local area that's in the southwest, and from there we connected to the government, and subsequently, whenever we heard that there's an opportunity for any government function at the federal capital, that's in Abuja, we tried to barge in. Initially, we were barging in, then we got recognized, and we are now at a level where if anything wants to happen at the federal level, we'll be invited. The recent one that held at the State House concerning the new Ministry of Livestock Development, we were invited to participate in the stakeholder engagement. So for any organization that wants to do that, it requires a lot of, obviously we are going to have challenges. That's having to know what is going on in Abuja. We have somebody there that tells us, and then we are always ready to attend such meetings at even a very short notice. And so that is what we do. Then, so which means that we have a very cordial line of communication with the government. Then we have gone a step further in the sense that we know that Abuja does not really make Nigeria. Nigeria has 6 geopolitical zones, and these zones are comprised of states. We have 36 states in Nigeria. So what we now do is through the faculties of agriculture in the various universities across these regions, we have established teams, which we call the PICs, that is Policy Influence Committees, comprising of communicators, agricultural economists, and agricultural extensionists, so that we can always make sure that we communicate. We also engage in stakeholder engagement. We collect data, and this data provide evidences that can be presented to stakeholders, such that if a policy or if an idea is already fermented and, should I say, perfected in a particular zone, it can be shared across. So we thereby create a sort of a multiplier effect for what goes on in one region can also be adopted or adapted across the regions. And so that is what we are doing currently.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for being brief. Yeah, we know our countries are huge. So how are you going to make sure that you address all the issues in the country and you make the government engaged? That's a very important point. Now coming to Dr. Nalishebo, we have heard about capacity building being a continuous effort. Yeah. You cannot invest once and then say you've built capacity. So it's a continuous process. And you have been with ANAPRI, we're receiving support from PRCI. Based on your experience, yeah, what specific capacity building initiative under PRCI had the most significant impact on ANAPRI's ability to deliver to its mandate?
So thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Let me also thank ANAPRI for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this exciting conference. I've been part of these conferences for a number of years now, and it's exciting that we are holding it here in Senegal, where Madam Astou is now the Deputy Chair of the Board. Let me also thank Milu and Dave for setting the scene for today's conversation. So before I come to your question, give me the opportunity to react to what I heard being said today by both Dave and Milo, and then I will share what my experience has been over the years as immediate past Executive Director and founding Executive Director of the ANAPRI Secretariat. I want to start on a light note, because when you sit amongst professors, doctors, everything seems to be rigid. You know, these are evidence generators. So I want to start on a light note. I have a son who was about 19, and I said to him, I am off to an international development conference. And what he said to me was, I can bet you in that conference, these 30 phrases will be mentioned. And he said, Mom, tick them off as they are mentioned. The top of that list was capacity building. He said in that conference, they will talk about capacity building. The second was sustainable development. He said they will talk about sustainable development. Policy, they will talk about policy. But the one term that he doesn't have on that list, because he asks me this all the time, have you carried your list? I'm off to an ANAPRI conference, have you taken the list of 30 phrases? Now, the phrase that he doesn't have on that list is an important phrase that we are talking about today, localization. So I need to ask him to update his list. So having said that, it has become very clear that local institutions are relevant. And I'm sad to hear, though, from my colleague from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that these local institutions which are relevant are not sustaining engagement with their national governments. Now, that doesn't sound like a good message. So institutions, please take note. You need to sustain engagement with your governments. So we are all agreed that local institutions are relevant. And if the COVID-19 pandemic is something to draw on, where did our national governments get real-time data to influence decisions that were being made when the COVID-19 pandemic was taking place? It was from the local institutions, because people could not fly in. You know, we were sheltered in our places, and you know, you couldn't have researchers coming in to collect data because there were no flights. So that's just an example that I'm giving of the relevance of local institutions and the trust that our governments have given to our local institutions to be providers of information and recommendations for policy. The second point I want to talk about is the point around financing African policy institutions. And I'm speaking as immediate past executive director of the ANAPRI Secretariat and not necessarily in my current position. Why is this a complicated issue to discuss? And I'll tell you why. The narrative needs to change. Dave talked about behavioral change. But whose behavior needs to change when it comes to financing African agriculture policy institutions? And now, to answer that question, I'll ask 3 questions. Number 1, who is the beneficiary of your research in these African institutions? And from what I'm hearing, it is the policymaker. The policymaker is the beneficiary of this public good called research. Now, that policymaker needs to invest in that research. According to the Malabo Declaration of 2014, African governments have been encouraged to allocate at least 1% of agricultural GDP to research and development. But is that happening? When you look at the biennial review reports, I wonder how many countries have actually even surpassed that 1%. There are a few countries that have, but many of the African countries have not surpassed that 1% allocation to agricultural GDP. So I'm talking about finance. Everybody else has talked about policy, research, and so on. So that was question number 1. Who benefits from the research? It is the policymaker. My second question is, who benefits from those policies? Who benefits from the enabling environment that is created as a result of our policies, regulations, and legislations? A range of stakeholders benefit. I will start with the general public, your general population. They benefit, yes. But there is a group called the private sector, right? The producers, they benefit. So one of the questions that should have been asked of the research centers is around collaboration with the private sector for research. How many of these institutions have been innovative enough to partner with the private sector try and get some resources out of the private sector, change the narrative, make them realize you are researching to create the environment for them to be able to operate. So that's another group. The third group, of course, is the non-African economy. They benefit from your research that informs policy, that creates an environment for non-African economies to also benefit. So when you talk about international trade, is that not because an environment has been created for private sector, international private sector, to also benefit from the enabling environment created by the researchers? Now, that is, I ask the question, whose behavior needs to change? Everybody's behavior needs to change, right? Because these policies do not only benefit Africans living in Africa, they benefit non-African economies, and therefore it should not be a difficult conversation. When we talk about equitable partnerships, this conversation should not be difficult because the benefits are global. They are not simply continental. So I thought I should put that message across, not to the donors and not to the non-African economies, but to you, the African institutions. When you sit at those tables, what do you discuss? The other question I wanted to ask is, I talked about 1% of agriculture GDP to research. When I travel around Africa, the first thing I see when I'm driving from an airport is a big stadium. Right? Big stadiums in these African countries. Okay? How much does it cost to build that stadium? Right? So when negotiations are happening at those tables, how much of those negotiations are saying, okay, give us at least a small amount for our research centers, for the university, for Tegemeo or ISAR or whatever, to also have some funding, you know, take 10% of that stadium and give it to SUA, and a lot will be done. So I'm just saying that behavioral change, which Dave talked about, is broader than we know. There are a lot of minds that need to change. The shift needs to change. So to the EDs in those institutions, please change your narrative as well, and you know, knock harder than you are, and don't accept what you get.
Thank you.
So, and then in terms of, sorry, very quickly, in terms of what I thought were some of the capacities that were built by PRCI. So PRCI is a model that I always say, wow, I wish other donors could actually learn from what PRCI did for ANAPRI. One of the things that they helped us do was to take charge of our own agenda, our research agenda. They helped us to take charge of our capacity building agenda, but they provided us technical support, but we were leading the charge. ANAPRI was able to develop their first ever, there were many firsts under PRCI, first ever strategic plan for ANAPRI, first ever operations manual, you know, where I could tell my board member, my chairman, this is how far you can go, sir, because we now have an operations manual and we have to follow the book. We also collaborated with the trainings from a number of consortium members. I remember names such as MyWish and Suresh and from IFPRI. So we collaborated with other non-African centers to build our capacity. We have a lot of training material on the ANAPRI website generated out of the PRCI partnership. So definitely a lot was done, you know. 6 minutes is not enough for me to conclude my
sure.
second.
Thank you very much. Yes, so it's the issue of narratives that we need to look at, and issue of change of behavior. Yeah, we can discuss that one. If you can stay put, because there might be some questions that you might need to respond to. I don't know how many more minutes I'm going to get from the MC, but see, now we are in the question and answer session. So let's have the mics. I can allow, because of time, I think I can allow maybe 3 questions, most. Okay, there's one hand there. Another one on this side. Okay, 3 questions.
Thank you all for your remarks and insights. They're very, very thought-provoking. My name's Timothy Silberg. I'm with Michigan State University. I'm in charge with institutional capacity strengthening, so very engaging discussion to hear about. I wanted to pose to the panel just particularly the research centers themselves, but perhaps other panelists may have some insights to offer here. Is I'm hearing, based on Alisheba's previous comments, that it seems we need to go to the end user first, so the policymaker. So do you have anything to say on behalf of either the centers or just your insights is, how do you first engage the policymaker first to make sure it's demand-driven research, as opposed to us just coming with a policy report, but rather, what do you need from us? And then going back, to the lab, conducting your research, and then coming back with meaningful research. Just using that type of process, as opposed to the old academic way of, we hear a need from the public, we conduct our research, and then we go to the policymaker. So if you could offer any insights in that process, I would love to hear them. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. There was a hand there, please. Back.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much, panelists. My name is Rosemary Emegu Isoto, and I'm from Makerere University, one of the centers. I just want to appreciate that a lot that has happened, and most of the panelists were talking about capacity building and the importance of communicating these messages, the policy research messages to the policymakers. Mine is more like an ask, because I think one of the presenters also said that it is important that ANAPRI provides that support to the centers. Is it possible then that ANAPRI, together maybe with the development partners, can ensure that they intentionally build the capacity of communicating these policy messages to the policymakers? Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. I think it can be answered by any of the panelists. Okay.
Thank you very much. I will be very quick. My name is Frejus Toto. I'm the Executive Director of the African Center for Equitable Development. I'm just coming from Cape Town, where we were discussing about evidence-informed policy making. And there have been a discussion there which resonates a lot with our organization. We are a think tank, but we produce less than we translate. So we are more on knowledge translation and very much less on knowledge production. So my question today is to this assistants and to the speakers. Do you think maybe it's the time for us to recognize that it's not the job of the researcher to make sure that his research is used by a policymaker? And that is a job of another organization, of another specialist within the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tutu. Okay, yes, there's another one, the last one, and then Mike, there's a gentleman there.
Yeah, thanks for allowing a fourth question. You said 3. It's going to be just a quick one. I am Jerome Quest with Gardesa in Botswana. You said that you had difficulties to retain highly qualified staff. I'd like to know, where does this staff go, and how can we prevent this brain drain?
Okay. I think the first question is directly to Dr. Nalishebo. If I'm not mistaken, the question about how do you engage policy to get a demand-driven research if I can rephrase that question, the first
Right.
one.
Okay, yeah. So I'm not sure that I actually said, what the person who's asking the question said, but I can begin by simply saying this. Countries have blueprints. They have high-level national development plans, right? 5-year, 6-year, 10-year. So they have a blueprint, they have a direction, right? So that is where you begin. That is the entry point. That is where you begin the conversation. This is what is contained in your blueprint. Where would you like us to provide you with support? Which particular areas within the blueprint? In any case, I believe these institutions have participated in developing that blueprint anyway. So the policymaker is a key stakeholder in this agenda. You can't just begin some research on the side and forget that these countries already have their own policy documents and so on. So I would begin from that premise. What is the desire of the country? What is the vision of the country? What is contained in their blueprint? Of course, in addition to whatever new emerging issues are coming out, that are not contained necessarily in that blueprint. But I think that is where I would begin. I also wanted, and I hope I've responded to your question effectively, but I'll let my researchers, before I give you the floor, 1 minute, you can respond to that.
The same question.
I wanted to talk about the brain drain. The issue of brain drain. Why are our researchers taking off and going off to other parts of the world? So initially I talked about finance, right? That was one. But I think organizational management is evolving. In the 21st century, it is evolving over time and at a very fast pace. Your environments, your work environments, and I'm sure John will agree with me, how you treat your staff is very important. How you remunerate them. Work-life balance. Is that actually happening in these institutions? So the grass is greener on the other side. So what happens? Your researchers take off. Because we forget about, we focus a lot on research, churning out papers. This is what we focus on. And yet that is only 60% of what a research institution should be doing. The other part is managing your human resource. That very person who goes off to do research needs to feel that he is happy in this institution. So it's not always about going off to look for better remunerations, but it's also about the environment in which we operate. So African institutions need to learn from other institutions on the globe, how they are running their own institutions, how they are treating their staff, how they are remunerating them, and how work-life balance is actually happening in these institutions. Some people don't work because of what you... I talk too much. Yeah, so basically, I just wanted to say that, what makes researchers leave is not always the resources. Because what I know about researchers in the few years that I worked at ANAPRI is that they are very passionate about what they do. Very passionate. They can even do pro bono work. But it is because sometimes that work environment, that perpetual board, we heard about perpetual boards that are not changing. And a question that I would have liked to ask, and I apologize if I'm stepping on anybody, so is, what is the age bracket of those executive directors? And then are they in tune with the 21st century? So that question should have been asked.
I think that one can be well discussed during tea break and lunch. Okay, yes. Dr. Dakar.
Yes, I was going to add to the response to the first question. That's about, I read it as, how does a think tank, or where does a think tank begin his work? And I think in PILAF, what we do is we assess existing situation. Are there policies? Are there no policies? When there are policies, to what extent are these policies effective and touching on the stakeholders. So we now go down to the stakeholders and engage the stakeholders to see how they feel concerning those existing policies. We did this with a day-old chick system in Nigeria. I mean, those were the day-old chick stakeholders. And we invited all those that are concerned, including banks that give them loans to do the trade and all that. And we're able to identify gaps in the policies. So from these evidences, we now engaged the Commissioner for Agric that, okay, you have this policy on ground, and this policy is not going to work because this is what your stakeholders are experiencing. They are not going to benefit from whatever is on ground. And so from there, we now went back and engaged the stakeholders the more to say, okay, what is going to work for you? So for those who manage the hatcheries, what is going to work for you? For those who buy the day-old from the hatcheries, what is going to work for you? For the transporters, for those who make the cartons, for the packaging, what is going to work for you? And at the end of the day, we were able to come up with something that is that we packaged, and we now went back to the policymakers in the ministry to present our findings. So, and that's the only way. And recently, like I mentioned when I was speaking, in Nigeria, we are just trying to establish a Ministry of Livestock Development. And because I'm close to the secretary, the implementation committee, which is chaired by the president himself and co-chaired by Professor Ataru Jega, the secretary is Professor Yaya, who happens to be a personal friend. I had to call him and tell him, look, before you do anything, identify all the necessary stakeholders. And they identified about 12 groups, including the cattle herders, who cause a lot of problem in Nigeria. And they brought everybody together and were able to engage and discuss. Each group met and they came up with ideas as to what is going to suit them. And that is what they are brewing now, to distill and see, okay, what is the policy that's going to drive this ministry. And so I would say that the beginning of any policy transformation or policy establishment is, first of all, to identify gaps by interacting with stakeholders, and then you now know what is going to work, and then you can now, bring that up as a policy document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a process. There's one question that has, I don't know, anyone who can volunteer to answer that one, that should we separate between those who are developing research knowledge and the engagement part? Should we separate the two centers? Or otherwise I can give it to Alan. I know he's good in answering difficult questions.
Can I speak?
Yes, please.
I think researches are useless if they are not targeted at solving a problem. And so most researchers should first of all see, at least in my own supervision of my students, I first say, okay, give me a problem of statement. What do you think your work is going to achieve? And from there, but then the issue of what do you do with the output of that research is a different ballgame. Researchers are not equipped with the logistics to take their research outputs to policymakers. And that is why we are trying to say that there must be a forum whereby policymakers will be engaging researchers. Even the policymakers, they have their own problems. There are times that a policy they are trying to operate in their day-to-day activities, they encounter challenges and they don't know what to do. But if there is frequent communication between the town and gown, as we say, then it will be possible for researchers to come to the aid of policymakers, and it will also be possible for policymakers to be aware of what outputs researchers have on their shelves that can be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, not too much to add. I think it's a really good question about sort of separation of generating research and the translation of that research. I would say no, you don't want to completely separate it. I think it's a muscle that researchers have to develop, is good communication, is good translation, and to think through the policy implications. I personally have read many research outputs where the last page says invest in R&D, invest in infrastructure, invest in market access, invest in extension. Policymakers have heard it all before, and it almost cheapens the quality of the research if the policy recommendations are poorly translated, poorly communicated into something actionable, practical, costed. That's a huge gap. That's part of translation, is converting a research recommendation or research finding into something that's got a price tag. How much does it cost to implement this recommendation? Because without that, it's pretty irrelevant. So I would say no, that you shouldn't entirely separate the two, but I do agree that there is need for much better translation. And if there are specialists in that field, absolutely, let's bring their skills to bear, because it's definitely a gap.
I fully agree with you. I'm sure it's convincing. I think we need to stop there, but we have a closing remark. Okay. Okay, according to the plan, closing remark for the session.
Yeah, okay. So thank you to the panelists. Lots of great comments, coming out of great experience, right? And great commitment and great passion. Like one of you said, the passion that you all bring to this is just so important. So it's been an honor to me to be able to participate in PRCI, to be able to meet all of these people, to be able to try to understand what your priorities are and see how we can help you pursue them. So I'm grateful for the experience. I personally, Michigan State University, we're committed to doing this for as long as we possibly can. There are a lot of people doing it, and I thank you for the opportunity. And I think that the more we do these kinds of panels, bring all these people together, the relationships that get formed are just so important to the ongoing quality of the work that gets done. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, so if you have any idea when you are during the 3 days, you can share your ideas with either myself or I have Emmanuel, Dr. Emmanuel somewhere. Yes, you can share with Dr. Emmanuel so that we compile the ideas, we make sure that we make a follow-up. Otherwise, I thank you everyone. Thank you the panelists for the session. And I don't know, you're going to have a photo group photo? No, okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Professors, doctors, distinguished partners, ladies and gentlemen, both here and online, can we all agree that this was a very enriching session? Raise your hand if you're... Thank you. Now, can we all agree that our speakers set the foundation, set a strong foundation for the discussions to come during these 3 days? Raise your hands and say yes. Thank you, dear speakers. Your contributions and insights were very, very valuable for driving localization for policy action through investment in capacity building. Your perspectives have illuminated the critical role of strengthening local institutions to ensure impactful and sustainable policy implementation across Africa. Let us carry forward these lessons as we continue to explore solutions that will transform policies into tangible solutions for our continent. We will now transition to a health break. I know it is much needed. Yeah, you need coffee, right? Please refer to your agendas for the timing of the upcoming sessions. Thank you for your participation, and let's keep the conversation alive throughout the day. Thank you, everyone. And we meet again here at 11:30, please. See you all in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. 11:30. Please use this door. Excuse me. Excuse me, everyone. Please use this door. Open it. Ouvre la porte. Ouvre la porte. Tiens-la ouverte. Voilà. Pour ceux qui parlent français, le break c'est par là. Cette porte-là. Oui. If our esteemed panelists are still here, please gather for a picture. Dr. Mpenda. Dr. Mpenda, I think we can gather for a picture. Nice to meet you. Okay, I'll tell you.
You have other needs. Everyone does this, right? After the Yeah, I'm struggling with language barrier. I am struggling. And the service guys totally novice of what to do and even how to manage their own equipment. So I'm having to configure all their systems all over again.
It happens sometimes.
Well, but at least I'm probably ready to start. So you can see that it's
The coffee break is on the left. You can use this door